Hi all, welcome back to my channel. My name's Ollie and this is SimplyStitchy. Now in the last few videos we've been working our way through this pattern, which is a Christmas table runner designed by Carol Swift, and it's on the ilovequiltingforever.com website. The links to the pattern and the website will be in the description box below. And if you've watched my previous two videos, you'll know that we've used fusible web or Wonder Under to stick applique pieces to backing fabric to keep them in place long enough to be able to stitch the design to the fabric. That's one of the blocks that we've done so far, and that's the other one. Now what we're going to do today is I'll walk you through how to stitch the pieces to the backing fabric. We'll look at how to construct the quilt top and hopefully get on to constructing the quilt sandwich too. So let's get into it. Now the stitch we're going to use to attach the applique pieces permanently to the fabric is a zigzag stitch, and the reason why you use a zigzag stitch with applique is because the zigzag will stop the fabric on the applique pieces from fraying too much. Now what I'm using is a zigzag set on a length of 1.5 and a width of 2.5, but you can use whatever size, width and length of zigzag that you want on your applique. It's completely up to you. Do this on a slow speed, and all you do is you just zigzag along the edges. If your machine likes zigzagging in reverse, do a back tack. If it doesn't, then swap to a straight stitch to do the back tack. And you can do this whatever speed you like. Don't worry too much about whether you've gone straight off the edge and onto the backing fabric. It really doesn't make that much difference. It's your applique. You know, you get it as close to the edge as you want it to be. Ooh, too far. Now when you get to the end of the bit that you're doing, just back tack it, and you'll see why in a second. Okay, what I'm going to do, I'm not going to take the piece of applique out from underneath the sewing machine. All I'm going to do is push it to the next bit. Now by jumping across the colours in between, you're left with a little bit of thread going across the top like that. I'll show you what to do with that in a minute, but by jumping from section to section, it means you don't have to keep stopping, pulling your piece out and snipping your threads to move on to the next bit. It doesn't save thread, but what it does is it saves time and makes quilting just that little bit easier for you. Okay, so I finished all the green bits. Now what I've used is I've used a matching thread. You can use a contrasting thread, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to be using different colours for each of the different coloured leaves, but you can use the same thread colour all the way around if you want to. It's your applique. But what we're going to do now is we're going to grab the scissors. I've got a big pair of scissors, you can use smaller scissors, and these little bits of thread that we've got, we're going to just slide the scissors under and just snip them off like that. Now this is why we back tacked on the start and the finish of each of the green leaves, because obviously when you cut the threads, that means that your stitches could unravel if you didn't back tack after each one. Whenever you're sewing slightly curved shapes like these leaves, there's two ways that you can get round. You can either sew, and then when you get to the curvy bit, stop, leave your needle in, lift your foot up slightly and turn the work to follow that curve round, or you can very gently, as you go round, turn the actual work while the machine's stitching. Now a slower speed when you're first starting out is better for that, because you'll get more accuracy and it'll be easier to do it that way. Now if you find while you're doing that this bit puckers up, stop, lift your foot and then just gently flatten it back out and carry on going. And when you come to the edge, leave your needle in and spin it. It's the usual pivot method. When you get to the circle bit in the middle, it might be easier, especially if you're new to applique, to actually use the pivot method to go around and turn your speed to a slower one as well so that you've got more control. And then when you start to feel slightly more confident, you can try the turning method. Now I'm not putting any pressure on it when I do that, it's just gently slide it under the foot. When you've got your applique blocks attached to the backing fabric, the next thing that you need to do is figure out if you want to put sashing in between all of them to join them all together. Now I'm going to use sashing because my two backing fabrics, the one on here and the one on the poinsettias, are different. So by adding the sashing, I'll have a better, or rather a neat join between the different fabrics. Now if we refer to the pattern, it says here that the sashing strips, which is about here, need to be 1.5 inches by 12.5 inches. Now obviously that's going to be different if you're using a different pattern, but follow the instructions, they'll let you know how much fabric you need for those little bits. These two bits are the sashing that go between the blocks, and I've also cut out slightly wider 2.5 by 12.5 pieces for the right border and the one on the left as well. And now all we really need to do is sew the strips together. Now when you're attaching the sashing to your quilt block, which is this bit, you want to make sure that the right side of the sashing is on top of the right side of your quilt block. What we're going to be using is 1/4 inch seam allowance. When you've stitched all the strips and blocks together, you should have something that looks like this. And what we need to do next is do the pieces that go across the bottom and the top. Now before you sew the top and bottom pieces on, give your quilt top a bit of a press. And with quilting, what you always do is you always press your seams not open but towards the dark side, and that's so they don't show through the light colours on the front when you've put everything together. Now all we need to do is give it another press. Remember to press your seams towards the dark side, they have cookies, and then we go on to the next stage. Okay, once you've pressed it and your seams are all going towards the dark side, the next thing to do is true it up a little bit. Ta-da! And there it is, the finished quilt top. Now all we have to do is put it together in a quilt sandwich. Now to make your quilt sandwich, obviously you'll need your quilt top, some backing fabric. I'm just going to use the same fabric that I used to do the borders and the sashing, but you can use anything you like. You can have a contrasting backing if you want. And you're also going to need some of this stuff. This is wadding or batting, depending which side of the Atlantic you're on, and you can get this from quilt stores, online or offline. I'll put a link in the description box below. It's going to be an Amazon affiliate link because I'm an Amazon affiliate. You don't have to use that link There's no extra cost to you if you do use the link, but it does help me out and I appreciate it. But you could just Google quilt batting or quilt wadding and you'll find this stuff online for yourself. Now it comes in different thicknesses. This is a low loft, you can get high loft, and obviously the thicker it is, the thicker your finished quilt or table runner is going to be. To make your quilt sandwich, what you're going to need is your backing fabric, right side facing down, because obviously you want that on the outside of the finished quilt. You've got your wadding layer or your batting layer next, and then your quilt top facing upwards right on the top. When you cut your backing fabric and your batting or wadding to a certain extent, you need to make sure that they're both just a little bit bigger than your quilt top to allow for any shrinkage when you're actually quilting on the top of it. And the next thing that you're going to need is safety pins. Now, it doesn't really matter what size of safety pin you use, whatever size you've got is fine, but what you want to do is, starting at the middle of the quilt, you just use the safety pin to hold the 3 layers together. Oops. Try not to disturb the sandwich too much by lifting it up too much, but you do need to make sure that that safety pin goes all the way through. And then you just carry on putting safety pins all the way over the quilt top, and make sure that you smooth it down. That's it. To keep it nice and even. Happy that you've got enough safety pins in your quilt top to keep it sandwiched together, you're on to the next stage, which is actually quilting it. Now when it comes to quilting it, how you do it is entirely up to yourself. There's no right or wrong way of actually quilting it. You can quilt it to within an inch of its life with loads and loads of squirrely lines or little circles. You can go to town with free motion quilting if you want to. What you'll get if you do that is quite a solid quilt. I like mine a little bit more kind of flexible, so all I'm going to do is stitching in the ditch, which is basically, you see all these lines, all the seam lines where we've added the borders and the sashing. I'm literally going to sew in the ditch that's between those 2 bits of fabric all the way around, and that's all I'm going to do, and that's all that you need to do as well. As I say, however much or how little quilting that you do on your quilt is up to you. It's your design decision. The only thing that you have got to make sure is that you do put a little bit on there, because you need the quilting to hold the batting or the wadding in place. Now when it comes to quilting, there's one little gadget that you can get for your sewing machine, which is an absolute godsend for keeping both your top layer of the quilt and the bottom layer of the quilt going underneath the needle at the same time, and that's one of these gadgets. This is a walking foot. Now this one actually came with Jerome. It's a Janome walking foot. You can get walking foots made by other sewing machine brands, and you can also get generic ones. I'm going to put a link in the description box to generic walking feet, so that if you haven't already got one, you can get yourself one of these. You'll be glad you did. You'll be wondering what you did without it, because these little guys aren't just useful in quilting, they're actually really useful in other kinds of sewing as well. Adding your quilting foot or your walking foot even to your machine is easy. All you really have to do is take your existing foot off using the screwdriver that came with your machine, or any small flathead screwdriver. Just needs to be big enough to get into the nut that's holding your foot to the machine. Oops. Like that. So what you do is you take off the foot and the shank. Okay, so what you want to do, whoops, keep hold of the nut that was attaching that to your machine, and then just bring in your walking foot. This little lever needs to go over the bar that tightens up to hold the needle in place, and then you just put the nut in, oops, in between those two little metal bits on the walking foot and through the hole on the needle bar. Now this bit's a bit fiddly and it's a bit tricky, but that is the hardest part about adding a walking foot to a machine. When you've got the screw in far enough to hold the walking foot in place, just tighten it up with your screwdriver. As before, start in the middle and work your way out. That way if there's any bulk it gets pushed out to the sides. In the next video what we'll be looking at is how to neaten the edges of your completed quilt sandwich and how to bind the edges together and finish the quilt off. If you like today's video, give it a thumbs up. If you want to see the other two videos in this series, check out the link that's coming up on the screen any minute now. You'll also see a link to some more of the content on this channel. If you subscribe and click the little bell, YouTube will give you a notification when the next video in this series goes live, and my other videos too. You're bound to find some great content on my channel, so go have a little nose. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Whatever video you go and check out next, I hope to see you back here for the next one. But in the meantime, whatever you're sewing it with, embrace your creativity and have fun. Thank you ever so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye for now.